Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Friends, welcome back. We are back in the office with Jeff Roberts. He's an attorney down here in Calloway County, has an extensive practice built up around personal injury and workers' comp in particular, also does Social Security disability. But today we are going to talk about injuries and accidents involving Uber and Lyft drivers. These are the very popular rideshare type drivers out there, but there are some things you need to know. And we're going to hit this from a couple of different, no pun intended, Jeff. We're going to tackle this from a couple of different angles. First of all, we're going to talk about the driver specifically. Then we're going to talk about what to do if you're a passenger who's involved in an accident while you're employing one of these rideshare services. And then if you're hit by an Uber or Lyft driver. So we're going to kind of approach it from that standpoint. Jeff, welcome. Good to see you, guy.
Good to see you, Jim.
Absolutely. Let's jump into this real quickly because there are some really interesting insurance issues that come into play here that I really didn't anticipate before we actually started prepping.
There is, and it applies not only to the Uber or Lyft passenger situation, but for the DoorDashes and the Uber Eats and all of those type of situations as well. And if you're a driver for Uber or DoorDash or Lyft or variety of those, then one thing that you may not realize is that your own personal insurance that you have on your vehicle may very well not apply to an accident that occurs when you're driving your vehicle for Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, whatever. And it, what people don't realize, I won't say most, but a lot of insurance policies in Kentucky that are written in Kentucky, they have a provision in them for personal vehicles that says this insurance doesn't cover if you're using the vehicle in a business setting. And so if you're doing delivery, whether you're delivering a passenger from one location to another location, or you're delivering food from one restaurant to the customer, or groceries from one location, from the store to the customer, then your personal vehicle insurance very likely is going to say that's a business use, so we don't have to pay anything for that accident if it occurs. And there's some distinction on these apps on whether you're available to pick up a ride or to accept. You've got yourself available, but you're not actively going to pick up a customer or going to pick up or deliver goods from that standpoint, and that makes a difference because if you're not actively on the app, then your personal insurance is going to apply. If you're actively on the app but you're not on a ride at that point, then I think you've got an argument that while I do this for a business, I wasn't at the time of this collision. I was not. I was available, but I wasn't actually using it. So you've got an argument in that regard that your personal insurance should cover. But I think it would be very clear if you're going to pick up a passenger or a product to deliver, or in the process of delivering it to the customer to wherever it's supposed to go, then you are definitely using your car for a business at that point. And most personal policies are going to say, we don't cover in this setting. And the question is, what coverage do you have then if you are at fault in causing the accident? I mean, we all hope and don't intend to ever be at fault, but it occurs, and frankly, it again comes down to, as far as the coverage you have, can come down to what your status is at the time. I know in regard to Uber, because I can access their coverage is available publicly, at least for Kentucky, so I could access that, and they do make a distinction. If you're available but not actively on a ride, then they have the coverage for bodily injury limited to 50,000 per person, 100,000 per accident, which is a little higher than the minimum limits in Kentucky, but not a great deal higher than what the minimum limits are in Kentucky. If you're actively on a ride at the point in time, then they have a single limit 1 million coverage, which is going to be greater than, frankly, a lot of people's personal insurance is going to be in that setting. And I think a big part of that is because when you're actually on the ride, that more likely that Uber itself could be held liable for your conduct in that setting. So they bump up the coverage from that standpoint because to help protect their own assets from being from a lawsuit against them directly for any negligence they may or may not have committed from that standpoint.
And we don't have any data about a DoorDash or even Lyft, which is also a ride-sharing program. This is just because of the publicly available information on Uber.
Correct. The others may be publicly available, but I couldn't find them in the search I did from that standpoint. So, but I suspect they're probably very similar, that they distinguish between available versus actually on the ride at that point in time, or on the clock, so to speak. For the same reason Uber does it, I suspect, is because that's when you're likely to be able to come against them personally for any, or that business for any negligence that may have occurred on their part as well from there. Another thing that these drivers need to understand is that they are probably not going to be covered under workers' comp. And a lot of drivers don't realize that, but Kentucky passed a law in 2018 about marketplace contractors, which is basically, the law says that if you're, essentially if you provide a mobile or computer type app or program to connect a customer to a driver, and they connect through that app, and they don't control various other aspects of that. There's some requirements under there that the marketplace contractor, which would be your Uber, your Lyft type places, they have to comply with. And if they comply with that, then the driver is statutorily considered an independent contractor and not entitled to workers' comp benefits. And that can be very important, especially if you're at fault in causing the accident, because while Uber has higher limits for when you're actually driving on on a delivery, the PIP coverage is only 10,000. They did not increase that coverage, and that, if you don't have personal health insurance to cover, that may be the only money that you have, and 10,000 doesn't go very far from that standpoint. So, and the the other side is what happens if you're not at fault in causing the accident. You're the driver. You're doing everything the way you're supposed to. Somebody else runs a red light and hits you. And what some don't realize is, if you've voided your own insurance coverage on your vehicle that you've purchased, you void not only the liability coverage, not only the bodily injury coverage, not only the property damage coverage, but you voided your underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage. So if the driver that hits you does not have any insurance or has inadequate insurance, you cannot, even if you paid for that insurance coverage on your vehicle, you're not going to be able to access that coverage because you're using your vehicle for a business purpose at that point in time. And so then the question is, can you go back against the insurance that Uber, Lyft, or these others have? And, uninsured motorists is a required coverage in Kentucky, and underinsured is optional coverage. Uninsured, though, can be rejected. It has to be rejected in writing. Underinsured just does not have to be purchased
It's a
from that standpoint.
separate policy that you actually
Separate
purchase.
policy.
Yeah.
And to explain again, if you've listened to other podcasts that we've talked about this, you'll know what I'm talking about. But uninsured kicks in if you're involved in an accident, you're not at fault, the other driver is at fault, then uninsured motorist coverage that you've on your vehicle would kick in. Normally kick in and pay for the damage, and normally your uninsured motorist coverage is going to be the same as your bodily injury liability coverage. A lot of times, sometimes it's limited at 25, and you have higher bodily injury liability coverage, but you have underinsured motorist or uninsured motorist coverage on yours. If you're involved in an accident and the driver has minimum limits insurance and your damages exceed their limits, then you can purchase what's called underinsured motorist coverage, and that will kick in and pay your damages over and above what the liability limits are that are available to you. So those are the two different ones. My understanding in this policy I was able to pull up doesn't really specify that, but at least, and I haven't had the chance to deal with this yet because in Murray, there's not a lot of Uber Lyft drivers in this area. But my understanding from what some other attorneys have told me is that some of these companies have rejected uninsured motorist coverage and not purchased underinsured motorist coverage. So if you are driving for that, you may not have underinsured or uninsured available to you in that setting. They cannot reject the PIP coverage. They have to have PIP because there's a Department of Insurance policy or whatever that's got to be rejected by the specific individual. But the company can reject underinsured and I think uninsured, and some of these companies have done so apparently. And so you need to be, you need to find out if you're driving for these, you need to check your own insurance to see if it has these exclusions for this type of coverage for using your vehicle in this thing, because it has that exclusion, then you could be exposing yourself.
Well, and like you said at the outset, I mean, this also covers this topic is also relevant for DoorDash and other meal delivery services, people that are just running grocery pickup services, all of that. I mean, you see a lot of these gig type jobs pop up, even the pizza delivery guys. Because I can remember in younger days, watching these guys try to make that under 30 minutes or it's free. And some of the things that, those were some of the craziest drivers out there. And now to learn that they may not have been covered, is scary.
Some of the delivery drivers are going to be covered. Like Domino's, I was a delivery driver at one time I worked at Domino's and did delivery as well as making the pizzas when I was younger. And I was an employee of Domino's. Even though I was using my own personal vehicle for the delivery, I was an employee. Domino's was going to be liable for any negligence. They were vicariously liable for any negligence I committed. So,
and you would have been, because you're an employee, you would have
because
comp
I was an
coverage as well.
employee, I would have had comp coverage as well because I was an employee from that setting. So my medical bills and all would have been covered. There now, my personal insurance probably would not have kicked in, but Domino's insurance would have kicked in, and they may have waived underinsured and uninsured, and I just didn't know to think about it at that point in time. Yeah. And so, you've got these drivers, and a lot of them don't realize that they are potentially exposing themselves to not being able to recover all of their damages because of that coverage is not there.
Yeah, when we first started prepping for this, I was just astounded because, I mean, these types of jobs are growing. I mean, you see more and more Uber and Lyft drivers, all over the place. And for them not to probably even understand that they may have some gaps there that they don't realize about. And it's, wow, that's an eye-opener.
Yeah, and it's something that needs, frankly, needs a legislative fix in regard to some of this, especially as far as the underinsured, uninsured, and requiring at least certain coverages greater, frankly, in my opinion, greater than the minimum limits in Kentucky. These type of companies should be required to have providing greater coverage because they're putting a lot more people out on the roadways from that standpoint.
I think so. Jeff, let's transition to the second scenario. If I am a passenger in an Uber or a Lyft vehicle that I've contracted them, they've picked me up, and we're going to the airport or wherever we're going, and we get into an accident. And let's assume, again, it could be the other party's fault, or it could be my driver's fault. How does that unfold?
Those claims aren't going to be affected as much from that standpoint. If the other driver is at fault, you've got the claim against the other driver, the same as if you were a passenger in your own personal vehicle.
You got your PIP coverage.
Or a friend, yeah. You've got the PIP coverage you've got the PIP coverage on the vehicle that's going to cover the same. And then you've got your claim against the at-fault driver, and if their limits aren't enough, then you've got your own personal underinsured or uninsured coverage that would be available on your vehicle because you're not using your vehicle in a business. You're a passenger in somebody else's vehicle. And, if Uber, Lyft, or these companies have waived underinsured motors, then it would, or haven't purchased underinsured motors, then you wouldn't be able to go against theirs. From that standpoint, but you still have your own personal coverage that you can go against. So you're covered the same as if you were a passenger. Your spouse was driving, you were a passenger in your own vehicle. You're covered the exact same situation if the other driver is at fault. If the Uber driver or Lyft driver is at fault, again, very similar. Now, you very well because if you're in the vehicle at the time, they're clearly on a delivery or taking you at that point. So under the Uber policy, the 1 million limits would kick in at that. So you're going to have higher limits than what you would normally see from that setting from there. And so you would have the claim against the Uber driver. And, if their personal insurance is voided because they're driving for Uber, Uber's insurance would kick in and pay from that perspective. So you've got that coverage available. And if Uber is putting a driver on the road that should not be out there, if they've had a DUI and a suspended license, and Uber put them out on the roadway anyway, then you could have, or something of that nature occurs where Uber or Lyft or one of these companies has been directly negligent, then you would have a potential claim against them for that negligence that they may have committed.
But I guess the good news for the passenger who may be injured in this type of ride-sharing accident is there's coverage. There should be coverage there.
Correct.
It's a question of whether or not the driver himself or herself is covered. That's really where the big surprise came in.
And exactly, and a situation that you can see, and I've I can certainly see this occurring is, if you're traveling for business, you're injured in one, then you would be covered under workers' comp as well. If you're traveling,
that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
You're a passenger, if your company sends you to New Orleans for a conference or to meet with a client or whatever, and you fly in and you catch an Uber to your hotel and you're injured in an automobile accident going to the hotel, it's going to be covered under your workers' comp coverage from that perspective as well. So you have all the same protections as you would have if you were in a vehicle that wasn't an Uber vehicle. Okay. From that standpoint.
So rest assured, it's safe to drive with them. Basically, safe to ride with them.
It was safe to ride with them, and from that standpoint, as far as the insurance coverages and all. And I mean, there are certain limits on who they can put behind the wheels statutorily and by regulation in Kentucky that limits, and they've got to follow they're supposed to follow all of those guidelines. And I don't have any reason to believe that they're not following those guidelines to make sure they're not putting people, allowing people to drive these vehicles that should not be doing so. And then the final setting is going to be, if the Uber driver's at fault and you're in the vehicle that gets hit by the Uber driver. And then that's a situation where it's going to come back to what was their status at the time. And have they voided their own personal insurance? And if they have, then the Uber insurance could kick in to pay. If they're available but not on a delivery at that point, then the lower limits are what you're going to get. If they're on the delivery, then the higher limits could kick in. So it's going to that's going to make a difference from that perspective on if you're driving and the Uber, Lyft, DoorDash person hits you, the status of that driver, and how do you determine? And it gets to be much more complicated because how do you determine whether they were going on a ride or on a delivery or not at that point? Obviously, if they got the bag of groceries or the food in their vehicle, pretty obvious they're on the thing. But if they're going to the restaurant to pick it up, or they're going to the airport to pick up the passenger they're going to deliver, you've got to get that information either from the driver or from the company they're working for. And how do you do that?
Well, and that kind of gets into some of that NCIS type stuff that you guys do as attorneys, where you can it's almost like going after the black box. I mean, there should be some kind of digital record of what was the status of that driver at the time of the accident.
Correct. Yes. So, and I know there is at least some proposals to require that information to be turned over, at least the status of the driver for at the time of the wreck and for a short time before and a short time after the wreck, their status at that point, so you can figure out which coverages are available and which aren't. And that is, and I don't think anybody really fighting that would fight that legislation too much from that standpoint. And frankly, if there is an accident, I would assume the police that respond to the accident would try to find that out from the driver at that point in time. And if not, then you could get that. Once you file suit, you could get it by serving a subpoena on Uber, Lyft, whoever they were working for, to figure that out at that point in time. A little more work to do it that way, but if you have to do that, you can.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And Jeff, as we've talked about in the past, you've got 31 years of handling motor vehicle accidents. I mean, you've got a lot of experience here working with some very complex, because you even do tractor trailer accidents. I mean, you do some very, very complex litigation when it comes to any type of motor vehicle accident. So, this new development of having a rideshare service, an Uber or a Lyft or a DoorDash or some type of delivery service. I mean, it's just another wrinkle, but the mechanics of it a lot of times are very similar to the work you've done in the past for a few decades now.
Correct. I mean, it adds a little more wrinkle to it than it had before, and causes a little more work on my end from that standpoint to figure out exactly where the coverage is and who we need to go after to get proper damages for my client in that regard. But it's in 31 years of doing this, a whole lot's changed, and you just you adapt and overcome.
Well, and we've made this distinction a couple of times, but we don't really blow this horn loudly enough. I don't think anyway. You're a trial lawyer, and you're someone who has taken these cases all the way. I mean, you understand how to build the case. You take the case assuming eventually it may have to go to trial. So the way you approach it from the very outset might be a little different from somebody that says, yeah, I can probably handle that case for you. Having an experienced attorney is worth it. Absolutely worth it.
Well, from my perspective, having done this for 31 years, and I have clients ask me frequently in workers' comp car wreck cases, are we going to have to go to court? Will we have to go to trial? And my response to them is, and I think it bears, statistically, most cases resolve. But
in other words, they settle.
They settle, yes. But the best way to get a case settled for fair compensation is to be willing to try that case and to work that case up for trial, or in a workers' comp case to work that case up to be decided by an administrative law judge. Because from my perspective, in my opinion, the insurance company and the defense attorney will know if an attorney's working the case up to settle or if they're working the case up to try the case. And the one that they don't think the attorney's willing to try the case, then they're never going to offer full value for that case, because they know they're eventually going to take less than full value because they don't want to try the case. So if it's not a case I'm willing to try on a car wreck case or something of that nature, I don't take the case on. for that very reason, because I don't, a lot of my cases do settle without us going to trial, but I will take any of my cases if they don't don't offer what I think is fair value to the client. Then we'll keep litigating it all the way through a jury verdict. If we got to go up on appeal because of issues that occur at trial, we'll go up on appeal. I've taken those type of cases up all the way, just like I have workers' comp cases. And if you have to do that, you have to do that.
Well, and I can't speak for the insurance companies who've settled with you in the past, obviously, but I would think knowing that you're willing to do that means that more of your cases might actually settle early on, just because they don't want the risk of going to litigation and losing and suddenly looking at a big check that they have to write. At least, I know you got to be careful about what you say, but I'm just common sense would say, yeah, if they know this guy's gonna potentially litigate this, I need to be careful about how I handle it, and I may step a little differently.
Well, and I think at least some companies do take that into account, certainly.
Yeah, I would think so. Jeff, these are these are complicated cases. The good news is you can handle these from basically any county in the Commonwealth. I mean, this is state oriented, right? This is a personal injury. You can litigate this from right here in Murray, Calloway County. You've got a satellite office now up in Hopkinsville in Christian County, but you can do work in Northern Kentucky. You can do work in Central Kentucky, and all the way out in Eastern Kentucky as well.
Correct. Yes, and I do handle these type of cases all over the state of Kentucky, and have for numerous years from that standpoint. And actually, if it's an out-of-state case, if you live in Western Kentucky, you want a local attorney, but your case is out of state, then I can be involved in that case. I would have to associate with an attorney in the state wherever it's at, and then work the case up with them. And I've done that frequently in my career as well. It doesn't increase the cost to the client when we do that. The fee's the same to the client whether I handle the case by myself or I associate with other counsel in a different state to do that. And that attorney in the other state and myself will divide up based on how the fee based on how we've divided up the work from that perspective. And frankly, I have access to find out attorney, find out not only the online reputation of attorneys in other states, but also the reputations of those attorneys with other attorneys, and that so I can find the best and the brightest, so to speak, in those areas to associate with. From that standpoint, it's your online reputation with past clients is hugely important, and that's something when you're looking to hire an attorney, you should go look at. Absolutely, 100% should go look at that. But attorneys who refer cases to other attorneys are referring to them because they know not only what their clients think of them, but what work they're doing in the court, what the judges and what the appellate courts are doing and saying about their work, so to speak. And that's something that's very huge to look at as well from that standpoint. And one thing I'm very proud of is I have a lot of attorneys who refer cases to me, and I think that past clients and other attorneys who refer cases to me, I think is some of the highest compliments I can get in practicing law, because with past clients, it shows that those clients are very, very satisfied that they're willing to refer a friend to me, and the same with an attorney, if they're willing to refer a family member, a client, a friend to me. To me, that's just the best compliment I can get.
Well, it's well deserved, well earned. I mean, you work hard for your clients, and if you go out to Google and you look at some of your Google reviews, it's amazing. I mean, you've got a ton of them out there, which as a relatively small firm in Western Kentucky, you've got more positive 5-star reviews than some of the larger firms I see in other areas. I mean, it's and again, that's just a testament to the hard work and the communication and just the way you kind of run your practice. And again, just congratulations on that.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And if you go to my law office website, you see that. If you go to Google, and you and I have talked about this. I don't understand it, but if you Google my Hopkinsville, you're not going to get all the reviews because they don't show the Murray reviews. I've been in practice in Murray for 31 years now, since 1992, going on my 32nd year. I've been practicing here in Murray, and so I've got a lot more reviews in Murray than I do Hopkinsville. When I opened the Hopkinsville office up late last fall, that starts off with 0 reviews. They don't bring them forward. So right now there's only 2 or 3 at Hopkinsville, but hopefully that's going to continue to increase over time from that standpoint. I don't know why they do that, but Google didn't ask my thoughts on it when they decided how to do that.
You know, it's just amazing they didn't call. Unless they wanted to sell you something.
Exactly.
So, exactly. Yeah. All right, my friend. Well, for the listeners out there, for the Uber and Lyft drivers, the DoorDash drivers, and other delivery service drivers, I hope you found this insightful. This may have tossed up some question marks for you, and would be a good idea to possibly call Jeff Roberts. Jeff, by the way, what is the best number for them to use to get a hold of you?
Best number you can call 270-753-0053 or my 800 number 1-800-844-5108. That's the best way to reach me.
And then as a fallback, the next step I would take is probably getting a hold of your automobile insurance agent and just talk through this topic because, I mean, again, you're paying for some coverage that, unfortunately, when you're on the clock, you may have actually avoided without knowing it. So I'm hoping you found that interesting. For the other people out there who are riding with these services, utilizing these services, good news is, hey, you're good to go. You're covered. And if you happen to get into a situation where you need to talk to an injury attorney or a comp attorney, once again, Jeff Roberts here throughout Kentucky is ready to help you. So, friends, thanks again for your time. Jeff, always thanks for your time, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.